Hello, skate punks. Sam Jones is a renowned photographer and filmmaker. His most recent example of the latter is the excellent new Tony Hawk documentary on HBO titled Tony Hawk Until the Wheels Fall Off. Sam, thank you so much for the time. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Well, you and I are speaking on the Tuesday that this film actually comes out on HBO and HBO Max soon after. Just how exciting is it to finally get to this point in this process?
Oh, I can't believe it's over. The process of making the film and selling the film and promoting the film. It's been a long journey from when I first asked Tony. It's been years, and yeah, it's kind of wild to be here, and it feels, to me it feels done, but I have to remind myself that except for a few people at the premieres that we've had, no one has seen it yet. So I'll be really curious to see how that goes.
Well, I'm fortunate to have gotten to see an early screening as well. And you and I spoke on the red carpet a couple of weeks ago here at South by Southwest. And we talked about the genesis of this film being in part you having Tony on your DirecTV interview show. I'm curious, though, what was the first step in terms of actually shooting? Did it start with an interview with Tony himself before you kind of fanned out and spoke to other people from his past?
That's an interesting question, because no, it didn't. It started with a visit to his mom, to her retirement home, or her convalescent home, because she wasn't doing great. And I knew that Tony, along with his siblings, had found a spot that could give her care because she had advanced Alzheimer's and dementia. And so he would go and visit her. And I just asked if I could come along. I used to see her at contests in the 80s. I used to see both of his parents. They were at every contest. And so I just wanted to go and see, that relationship. And it proved to be sadly fortuitous, because I think she passed away about 3 weeks after we had filmed that. And at that time we hadn't gotten any official funding or word about distributor or anything like that. So it was just sort of a leap of faith to go meet her and film that interaction. So that's how we started. And from the beginning, I wanted the film to not be categorized as the typical skate film or a genre film. And so that's why that scene shows up at the beginning of the movie, because the film is so much about family. And I was glad I got to meet her before she passed away.
I spoke with both you and Tony a little bit about vulnerability a couple weeks back, and that is, in a lot of ways, a major part of what you were able to show the people over the course of 2 hours. And a lot of it has to do with going behind the scenes with Tony's personal life. Was there much push pull that happened with regards to you making sure that people could see a side of him maybe they were completely unfamiliar with, just following his life as a skateboarder?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing when you're making a documentary about a living, breathing person. This isn't someone long ago in history that we get to examine his life with the benefit of hindsight. He's still an evolving human being who, I needed to get to know him and gain his trust and decide along with him how personal he was going to be. And I asked for his trust, and I asked for his candor. And one of sort of the fortuitous things that came out of COVID is that Tony wasn't doing a lot of things, as none of us were in the summer of 2020. So he had a lot of time to give me, and over that time and over several hours of interviews on multiple days over a year and a half, 2 years time, I got to know him on a level where I think he was either either he got used to me or he sort of forgot that we were filming or whatever. But I think he realized that, okay, I'm just going to have to trust this guy and open up and that's the challenge with a subject that you're not a partner with, because he wasn't a partner. He didn't have any say over the film. He didn't have final cut, none of that stuff. But he is choosing to share his life, and that's a delicate balance.
Well, this is much more than just a skate film. The skateboarding aspect of things is really cool as well. I mean, you go back and look at the history of just how skateboarding blew up in popularity through the 1980s and 90s. How much of that was you going off of just somebody who skated yourself in the 80s and also followed these guys? I think you admitted on the red carpet that you quasi used to stalk Tony Hawk. I mean, he was a legend even back then. But how much of that was based on your memory versus talking to some of these legends from the past and really boning up on your own historical understanding of what was happening in skateboarding at that time?
Well, some people talk about the unfair advantage, and I think my unfair advantage was that I was there, and one of my best friends was Neil Blender, and my current friends that I spend time with and ride motorcycles with are Mike McGill and Steve Caballero,
Hmm.
and also Tony's son. And so I've known all of these people for a long time, and I was at these contests and I skated. I was a sponsored amateur. So I skated in Castle, which was the California Amateur Skateboard League, which Tony's dad also organized. A lot of people don't know that he organized that before he organized the NSA. So not only do I know all the players, it was such a small scene back then that if you drove down, because my house was about an hour and a half north of the Del Mar skate park. But by the time 1983 rolled around, it was one of only two skate parks left. There was Upland and there was Del Mar. So we were constantly making the trip either by car or by train down to Del Mar to skate the park. And if you went to Del Mar at any time in the mid 80s, Tony would be there. So, stalking is a word that I think it was invented much later than, or come into vernacular much later than when all this happened. But it was such a small scene that we were just around him. And when it came time to go look at footage and to find the sources of this stuff, I knew it all existed, and I knew who might have it in their vaults and who might have saved VHS tapes and things like that. So that was definitely my unfair advantage in this film.
Was there any one person who provided you with more archival footage than the others from that time?
Well, Stacy Peralta was really generous, and George Powell as well. They gave us probably between 18 and 20 minutes of Bones Brigade footage because Stacy, as you see from the film, started the whole video revolution of filming these guys so that people in the middle of the country who never came out to these contests or skate parks could see the scene as it was evolving. And it was a hugely successful promotional tool for Powell Peralta as a company, and the other skate companies did it as well once Stacy showed them the way. But I think at the time, no one knew that was going to end up being the main currency about in the way with skateboarders shared their tricks. And so that was amazing to be able to comb through all of that footage and a lot of stuff that had never been seen. We found this interview that was 16 minutes long with Tony's dad, and I think maybe 30 seconds of it made it into a video back in the 90s. So yeah, so they were really helpful. And then also, some of the skaters like John Lucero, who was around in the Whittier days, he knew the source material and things that were out there. And Don Hoffman, whose parents built Upland, Don filmed all those contests and announced them. And so it was great to go hunting for all of that stuff.
I think it was Rodney Mullins who said the most interesting thing about Tony is watching him figure something out. You did a great job of depicting this when he ultimately lands that 900 at the X Games. But did you witness this up close and personal while filming him?
So what do you mean in terms of him learning?
Yeah, him just grinding and trying figuring out
Yes.
how to do something.
Funny enough, there was a trick that he was chasing for several days, maybe even weeks, while we were down there a lot. And it was like this board. It was like a kind of a pressure flip to a disaster slide. And it was such a weird, hard trick to pull off. Not a dangerous trick, but a very like little technical flippy trick. And I saw him wear himself out on that, multiple days trying to land it for no reason other than the fact that he thought of it and he wanted to own that trick, and no one had ever done it. And watching him do it and talk about it was so insightful into his process, and we definitely use that information for the film as well.
I don't recall you speaking with Tony in modern times about his mindset when he actually was able to land that 900 at the X Games. Was this done deliberately, considering how many other people you had commenting in that moment? And if so, why?
There were a few times where we found that letting the people who had grown up with him and really spent time with him give their observations, in a way, I felt that was a more interesting approach than having Tony tell it, because we get to watch Tony doing it. And I think in a lot of ways, Tony is, he's almost, uh, watching him skate tells you more than he could articulate. So when you hear Rodney talking about watching him fail and learn tricks, Rodney put that in a more eloquent way than anybody could. And during the X Games, what I thought was interesting is that Tony didn't really talk to anybody during that entire arc of those 12 attempts. But what that story told is that everybody from his life was tuned into that. Stacy Peralta wasn't there, but he was tuned into television, and Lance Mountain was tuned in, and Rodney was tuned in, and they all knew that this special thing was happening. And to see them try to explain it gives you more insight into Tony, I think, than for his retelling of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I vaguely remember that moment happening. I was watching the X Games at that time, but I think you did a great job of going back in and just really getting the intensity of it all, and just getting the looks on his faces and on his face, and the frustration and the determination, and as somebody put it in this film, the narrowing of his scope to where he is eventually going to figure it out, or he's going to come close to die trying. And so that was a little bit surprising to go back, and it honestly brought chills to the back of my neck and tears to my eyes to see him actually land it, even though I knew it was inevitable. I have to say, though, the most surprised that I was in watching this documentary, Sam, was seeing him admit to struggling with fame, the fame that came from moments like that. And then, of course, the fame that begat from the video game and its popularity. What was the most surprised you were in speaking with Tony and really probing into his life?
Uh, Gosh, that's a good question. I think that what I learned about Tony is that there is almost a responsibility that he feels to skateboarding. He was lucky enough to have a dad from the World War II generation that took a great interest in his kids and decided to devote his life post-military to helping all of his kids in their pursuits. His brother was a surfer, his sister is a singer, and Tony obviously was a skater. And some, Tony did not get the emotional acumen from his parents. They were not great communicators with each other. They didn't spend a lot of time together. And so Tony didn't have an emotional language with either of his parents. But what he saw his father do was give his time, and especially for probably men of a certain age from a certain generation, that is the way that men showed love. And I think how that manifested in Tony is that he had a whole bunch of work to do to become an emotionally present person. But from the beginning, he had this example of his father. And so when you see Tony creating a foundation and showing up at every skate event that he can, and being an ambassador globally for skateboarding, I think that was the emotional language he learned, is that he had this terrible time as a kid learning how to fit in, and he found this community and he found a place to skate, and he wanted other kids to be able to find that. So long story short, what I learned from Tony is that his love and his ambassadorship of skateboarding is not just another arm of his marketing strategy. It comes from the heart, and it's the way that he shows love. And I think if Tony had not come around or was not involved in skateboarding it wouldn't be in the Olympics. It wouldn't have been in the X Games. There wouldn't be a park in every underserved community throughout the United States. Um, Tony put the sport on his shoulders many times, and that, to me, I guess what I found out is that was genuine and not just not just part of the, you know, the idea of extending his own career. He really, really cares about it.
In modern times, he really does strike you as just one of those people who handles his fame with the utmost grace. He almost has like a Johnny Cash way about him where it's impossible to dislike the guy. I joked with him on the red carpet about Black Twitter and their hypothetical race war, talking about the white people they'd have a hard time getting rid of, and he was on that list. But he has struggled with his own ego at times. I'm curious, what was the most difficult question that you had to ask him throughout the making of this film?
You know, that's funny. I mean, I know I asked him a lot of questions about his personal life and about fame, but you know, those questions are, it's sort of like asking a bird what it's like to fly, because if you can't fly, you can't really probably explain it to someone who can, or vice versa. And I think with Tony and with anyone else who becomes famous, until your private life is put on display, until everybody knows your name, until you walk into you know, an arena in Detroit and you see that there's 60,000 people waiting there to see you, it's impossible to know what the effect is of that. And I think Tony does a great job of explaining that, you know, until fame hits you, you have no idea how to handle it, and then you're playing catch up. So, you know, those were hard questions, but I didn't expect for someone to watch this film and go, oh, now I know what it feels like to be famous. But for me, the hardest questions were about his injuries. And I know he is extremely, not defensive, but he's extremely careful and wants to be very accurate about the reason he keeps skating and the level of risk that he is personally taking, regardless of how it looks from the outside. So, you know, to ask him about his injuries and to ask him about his identity and what happens when you can't do the things you used to do, and who are you without skateboarding, those were hard questions for me to ask him.
I mean, you show an extremely scary head injury that he suffered at one point, I think near the end of filming. Obviously, just a couple weeks ago, he suffered a compound fracture of his femur, put the x-rays online, and it's as bad as it sounds. And 5 days later, he showed up on the red carpet at South by Southwest. I've never been more physically impressed standing next to somebody, because you could see deep down that he was in a lot of pain right there. But Sam, every time he took a picture, every time he conducted an interview, he passed his crutches off. That's to not show any sign of weakness. That is just incredible to see a dude operate like that.
Yeah, he definitely wants to handle these things on his own terms, and he wants to push the limits of what's possible. And, you know, knowing him on a personal level and getting texts and calls and things like that, he's definitely doing all the rehab plus a bunch more. And there's no doubt in my mind that whatever the healing process of getting your femur back to the best place it can be, he's going to take that more seriously and do it harder than anybody. Because that's what keeps him going. I think this broken femur isn't that different from a trick that he's trying to master. He's going to become obsessed, and he's going to find the limits, and he's going to push up against them. And he wouldn't be Tony Hawk if he didn't handle his broken bone the way he's handled the rest of his career.
When he's already telling the New York Times that he's hopeful to get to a demo in Vegas, I think in May or June. Like, I have no doubt that he's going to figure out some way, shape, or form to make that happen. And that speaks to something that you really probe at the end of this film. And that is every single one of these guys, every single one of these legends from the 1980s and 1990s eventually reaches that point where they're not willing to push themselves because they know that it could lead to a dire outcome. But Tony Hawk doesn't seem to have that in him. How much do you worry about Tony and his desire to keep pushing in this sport that really takes no prisoners when it's all said and done?
Well, you know, there are nuances to that, because every one of these skaters from his era the vertical skaters, Lance Mountain, Christian Desoy, Mike McGill, Steve Capillero, Kevin Staub, they're all still skating, and they're all skating on an incredibly high level. I mean, I go to the skate park with Mike McGill, and he's doing the tricks that he's comfortable with for his level of where he is right now, both in his head, risk wise, and his body, and how much time he's devoting to it. I don't think it's that different with Tony. I think that Tony um, just skates more than those guys and has a ramp that he owns that is the perfect size and transitions for him for his safety. And yes, he broke his femur, and skateboarding is dangerous, but I don't see him as that different than the rest of his peers. I do know he turns up the heat and pushes himself, but he also no one knows his body more than him, and knows the risks. So I don't know. I think all these guys, they're still taking those calculations. Mike and Steve are both motocross racers, and we go out to the track together and we ride. And those guys obviously more seriously than I do. But they've been professional athletes all their life, and they're used to those calculations. So I think that it's hard for someone who doesn't do these kinds of sports to understand the nuance of that. But I will say that I don't think Tony's being overly, he's not taking risks that are outside of his skill set. I'll just say that.
I guess to your point, he broke his femur on a 540, which you specifically asked him in this film how many times he's done. He's like, I don't know, 10,000 plus. So it is one of those moves that he is that comfortable with. For you, as somebody who skateboarded in the past, I guess you just admitted that you still skateboard nowadays. What is your limit?
Well, every time I slam from some trick, then that trick sort of goes in the I used to be able to do it bin, I guess. But our great editor on this project is a guy named Greg Fenton, and he's a skater as well. And one of the great joys of making this film was we would take breaks and go skate. And we actually met at the Santa Monica skate park called the Cove. And I just seen him there as one of the older guys that I occasionally run into at the park. But the great thing about skateboarding is that no matter what level you are currently at, the feeling is still amazing. And to be able to drop in and carve and get speed, and to push yourself at whatever level that day that you're trying to push yourself at, it's still a great feeling. And so I can still go out and drop into a bowl and carve and grind and enjoy myself that way. But I'm also incredibly mindful of what the risks are, because I don't have the luxury of laying myself up for 6 months, and very few of us do at this age. So it's in a way, I guess I'm experiencing the same thing that Tony is, and we all are. At what level, my mother's 84, and going down the stairs for her is a risky proposition, so, but she still goes down the stairs. And so I guess at every age, there's a risk, and there's a calculation you do, and you decide what is tolerable for you.
It's a good way to think about it. All right, last couple of questions here, Sam. First off, a couple weeks ago, because I am a student of the art of the interview, I asked you what makes for a good question, because you are a well-known interviewer who has spoken with a bunch of high-profile people. You said the key to a good question is listening, because the best questions tend to be the follow-ups. Is there a follow-up that sticks out in your head from asking questions for this documentary that elicited your favorite response?
Oh, well, hard to remember specific questions, because my style of interviewing is really more conversational. Mm-hmm. And if you were to go through my interview transcripts, they don't seem like interview questions. They seem more like a conversation. Sure. And, one of my frustrations is that I'm not as careful with my interviews. The reason my voice pops up in the films every now and then is that I don't coach the people I am talking to about how to say it in a way that it's a complete sentence, or the question is in the answer. and that can be frustrating for editing, but I think that I look for visual cues, and when I can see someone light up and you can see them start to sort of make calculations, and you can see the movie camera turning in their head. Those are times when I really try to lean in and expand that into a larger conversation, because I think we can all take cues, and we know when someone's fired up, and we know when they're excited to talk about something. And so I think I just try to stay present. It's hard, but you try to stay present. You try to push away all the distractions and really just be the best audience for somebody and help them in the best way you can to get to those memories. You know, we all have these memories that other people unlock for us. You know, like I'm sure you forget about an experience until someone tells a story. Oh, I was in Italy once, and then you remember, oh, I was on a trip once and that thing happened to me. And so in a way, good interviewing is also helping someone unlock those memories, and then giving them the space to describe those experiences.
And last question, you are a very well-known photographer. What's the key to a good portrait photograph, considering how many world-class ones you've taken in your life?
I don't think there's not really one key. To take a good picture is probably extremely similar to be a good interviewer. There's just more technical aspects to it. You know, when you're interviewing, you are listening and you're paying attention, and it's the same with photography. But you also have to sort of have a visual acumen and a take that is both, you know, I suppose being a photographer it's listening with your eyes in a way, but also having a thing that you want to say visually. It's a big answer. But I feel like my skill as a photographer also came from trying to really see who the person was, and making sure that I didn't put too much of my own vision or input into who they were, but to try to really enhance who they were. And I suppose in those ways, making a documentary is sort of just a big conceptual photograph of somebody, you know, and you get all the tools. You get music and sound, and you get editing, and but in a way, what you're trying to do is say, hey, here's a person I think is worth knowing, and I'm going to do my best to create a picture of them that gives someone else inspiration and curiosity into who that person's what their motivations are.
So it comes down to getting them comfortable through conversation, and then probably also lighting too.
I mean, I've always felt like the first thing is to be open to the moment and not be so rigid in your technical approach or in your ideas. And yeah, just look, you can't, there's no substitute for experience. I know it's a cliche, but there really isn't. And you have to fail a lot before you kind of figure out how to do things right. And in that way, it's not that much different from skateboarding. You know, you gotta take a lot of bad pictures before you can make a good one.
Tony Hawk would tell you to just start skating if you want to get better at skateboarding. I heard Ron Howard tell student filmmakers just start filming, and the same thing goes for photographing as well. He is Sam Jones, a renowned photographer and filmmaker. His most recent example of the latter is the excellent new Tony Hawk documentary on HBO titled Tony Hawk Until the Wheels Fall Off. Check it out now, HBO Max. Sam, thank you so much for the time today, and thank you for this wonderful film.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.